It was a peaceful Sunday evening in Amsterdam, October 4th, 1992. Families were finishing up their dinner in the quiet neighborhood of Bijlmermeer. Children played by the windows. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the high-rise buildings. No one knew that within minutes, one of the deadliest air disasters in Dutch history would unfold, right above their heads. At Schiphol Airport, El Al Flight 1862 had just lifted off. A massive Boeing 747 cargo jet, 4 engines. It was bound for Tel Aviv with a stop in Milan. On board were 3 crew members and 1 passenger. The takeoff was routine, but within minutes, something went terribly wrong. An explosive sound shattered the calm. 2 of the plane's engines had detached mid-air, ripping away from the right wing in an instant. The aircraft began to roll, yaw, and struggle to stay airborne, but the crew fought to regain control. In the neighborhoods below, people looked up. A low-flying jet roared overhead, too close, too loud. Something wasn't right. And then, the unthinkable happened. The plane crashed into a residential apartment complex, killing dozens on the ground. But the horror didn't end there. In the aftermath, disturbing questions emerged. Why did the engines fall off? What was the plane carrying? And why were certain facts hidden for years? This is the story of El Al Flight 1862. That day began like any other autumn Sunday in the Netherlands. The air was cool, the sky mostly clear, and Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport was running on schedule. Planes were landing and taking off like normal. There was no sign that the day would turn dark. One of the planes on the ground was El Al Flight 1862. It was a large cargo plane, a Boeing 747. It had flown 45,746 hours and completed 10,107 flight cycles before the accident. People called it a jumbo jet. That day, it was scheduled to fly from New York to Tel Aviv with a stop in Amsterdam to refuel and load more cargo. The flight crew was highly experienced. Captain Yitzhak Fuchs had flown for many years. First Officer Arnon Ohad and Flight Engineer Gedalia Sofer were with him in the cockpit. There was also one other El Al employee on board, flying as a passenger. On the ground, airport workers were loading cargo and refueling the plane. Everything looked normal. There were no warnings, no problems. Not far from the airport, in a quiet area called Bijlmermeer, people were enjoying their Sunday evening. Neighbors talked and laughed near the high-rise buildings. No one knew what was coming. High above them, the jumbo jet was about to take off, and in just a few minutes, their lives would change forever. El Al Flight 1862 was supposed to leave Amsterdam at 5:30 that evening, but due to a delay, it didn't take off until 6:22. The plane lifted off from runway 01L at Schiphol Airport and climbed into the sky, heading north before slowly turning to the right. At first, everything seemed normal, but just 5 minutes after takeoff, something terrible happened. As the jumbo jet flew above a lake called Guimeer, people on the ground heard a loud bang. It wasn't just any sound. It was sharp, violent, and followed by a sudden flash of fire on the plane's right wing. Pieces of metal began to fall from the sky. Some landed in the water. Some witnesses thought they were seeing parachutes. But they weren't. They were engines. Engine number 3 on the right wing had ripped off the plane. It flew forward, hit the wing, and then smashed into engine number 4, tearing it off too. Both engines broke away completely. A 10-meter section of the wing's front edge was also ripped out. The plane was still in the air, but it was now flying with a huge chunk of its wing gone and with only 2 engines left, both on the left side. Inside the cockpit, the pilots knew something was wrong. They felt the loss of power, but they didn't realize both engines had physically broken off the wing. From the cockpit, it was almost impossible to see what had really happened, especially as the evening light faded. At 6:28, the first officer made a mayday call. He said, El Al 1862, lost number 3 and number 4 engine. Number 3 and number 4 engine. They asked to return to Schiphol. Air traffic control cleared them for an emergency landing. But things kept getting worse. Because the engines were gone, parts of the plane's hydraulic system failed. Some flaps and slats, the parts that help a plane slow down and land, didn't work properly. On the left wing, they extended like normal. But on the damaged right wing, they didn't move at all. This caused an imbalance in lift. The left wing started generating more lift than the right. The more the pilots tried to slow down, the worse it got. The plane began to roll to the right, and the pilots could barely fight it. Still, they kept trying. They requested to land on runway 27, even though it meant dealing with a strong tailwind. The plane circled the city, trying to get low enough to land. But the damage made it hard to control. As they came around for a second approach, things spiraled out of control. The plane began to roll to the right, then it rolled more. The pilots fought back, but the controls were no longer enough. The aircraft tipped nearly completely sideways, 90 degrees. Then the final call came.
Going down, 1862. Going down, going down.
At 6:35, the massive cargo plane dropped out of the sky, straight into a block of apartment buildings in the Bijlmermeer neighborhood. What followed was devastation. At exactly 6:35 and 42 seconds that evening, the worst happened. El Al Flight 1862 fell from the sky. The massive Boeing 747 nosedived into the Bijlmermeer neighborhood of Amsterdam. It struck the corner where two high-rise apartment buildings stood, Groeneveen and Klein-Kreutberg. Then came the explosion. A massive fireball ripped through the structures. The explosion was so powerful that parts of the apartment blocks collapsed inward, burying homes and lives beneath rubble and flames. Several apartments were destroyed in an instant. The wreckage was strewn everywhere. The cockpit, or what was left of it, landed east of the building, near the elevated tracks of Amsterdam Metro Line 53. The force of the explosion blasted the tail section backwards, breaking it off. Inside the control tower, air traffic controllers were still trying to reach the crew.
El Al 1862, do you copy?
They called again and again, but there was no reply. At 6:35 and 45 seconds, someone in the control tower simply said,
"It has happened."
And the real meaning was clear. It was over. Thick black smoke began rising from the crash site. Even from the airport, the towering plume could be seen. The radar screen showed nothing. The aircraft had vanished from sight. The emergency response was immediate. Two police officers, already in the Bijlmermeer area on a burglary call, had witnessed the plane falling. They radioed for help right away. Fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue teams rushed to the scene. No one knew how many people might be hurt or if anyone had survived. Nearby hospitals were told to prepare for mass casualties. At first, even emergency responders didn't know whether it had been a cargo plane or a passenger flight. The confusion only added to the panic. The buildings were home to many immigrant families, including residents from Suriname and Aruba. It was a close-knit community full of children, grandparents, and working families. Many were just finishing dinner. Some were watching TV. Others were about to go to sleep. And then, without warning, a falling plane turned their world into a war zone. But before we continue with what really happened after this tragic crash, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. The crash was seen by many people nearby, including firefighters at a local station on Flyerbos Drief. What they saw was horrifying. When first responders arrived, they faced a fire of gigantic proportions. Flames were tearing through all 11 floors of the apartment buildings, and the fire stretched across 120 meters. No one at the crash point survived, but some people in other parts of the building managed to escape. Witnesses saw people jumping from windows, choosing a dangerous fall over the certainty of burning alive. Hundreds of residents were left homeless. Many had lost family members, neighbors, everything they owned. City buses were quickly turned into emergency shuttles, moving survivors to shelters. But while emergency teams worked tirelessly, there were also reports of looting, adding even more chaos to the tragedy. The very next day, the country's leaders visited the site. Prime Minister Ruud Lubbers and Queen Beatrix stood among the wreckage and ashes. The Prime Minister said,
"This is a disaster that has shaken the whole country."
And it had. In the following days, search and recovery operations began. Crews started finding the bodies of victims, slowly removing rubble and broken airplane parts. Among the wreckage, they also found something critical. The engine pylon fuse pins, these were discovered in a nearby landfill. The two fallen engines were recovered from the Guimir Lake, and parts of the wing were found scattered across the water nearly 9 meters long. The flight data recorder was found at the crash site, but it was badly damaged. The tape inside was broken in 4 places, especially in the section that held the last minutes of the flight. It was sent to the United States, where technicians were able to recover the data. But one thing was never found: the cockpit voice recorder. After the crash, investigators faced one big question: how could a massive Boeing 747 suddenly lose both engines on the same wing? That kind of failure was supposed to be nearly impossible. The engines on a 747 are attached with special parts called fuse pins. These pins are designed to break cleanly if there's too much stress, letting the engine fall away safely without damaging the wing. In theory, this should keep the plane flyable even if an engine falls off. But in this case, something went terribly wrong. The Dutch safety board found that the fuse pins hadn't failed the way they were designed to. Instead of snapping cleanly under pressure, they broke due to hidden fatigue cracks. They had small, invisible cracks that had grown slowly over time. These cracks weakened the structure until it suddenly failed under the stress of takeoff. So this is what happened. First, the inner fuse pin on engine 3 cracked due to fatigue and then snapped. Next, the remaining parts of the engine pylon also broke off. This caused engine 3 to slam into engine 4, ripping it off the wing too. As both engines tore away, they ripped open part of the wing, damaging hydraulics and fuel systems. The aircraft lost power to vital systems. Worse, the flaps on one wing didn't work properly, and the damaged wing generated much less lift. The plane could still fly, barely, because of its high speed right after takeoff. But once the crew slowed down to land, the right wing couldn't keep up. The plane rolled sharply to the right and crashed. In the end, investigators blamed 2 major failures. One was design failure. The way the Boeing 747's engine pylons were built didn't offer enough safety, especially when cracks formed inside the fuse pins. And another was inspection failure. These cracks went undetected during maintenance, which meant the plane was flying with a hidden danger. As a result, the plane lost 2 engines, a chunk of its wing, and control systems, making survival nearly impossible. The tragedy of El Al flight was not just about a plane falling from the sea. It was about how tiny flaws, left unnoticed, can grow into something unstoppable. Even today, survivors, families, and investigators ask, could this tragedy have been prevented? If someone had looked closer? What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments. We read them all. And if you're drawn to uncovering the hidden truths behind aviation disasters, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.